a storyteller. I've always been interested in narrative, always thought in a narrative kind of storytelling way. My advisor used to say, you're just not an article writer, you're a book writer. You want to spin out a story. And I think that helps students as well when they can see threads being pulled together in a narrative. Which also then presents me with an opportunity to play with that a bit and then say, if that's one narrative, what if we went from another direction and wrote another narrative and incorporated another different point of view about the past? And I think they realize that that's valuable as well because it gives everyone a way of walking into the history which in some cases their experience with in the past has been there is one narrative, a master narrative, it's a grand narrative, and this is it. As much as you might think students would say, oh, please don't give me grades, I just don't want to know. By the time they've seen the amount of that I have written on their work, I think that communicates to them the value that I place on what they do, and they realize someone cared enough about what I had to say that they wrote me an entire paragraph. One student actually typed 3 pages of comments for just on a single essay. The classroom setting that I try to create to engage students and get them to be interested in history revolves around being slightly quirky. From a psychological perspective, if you can get students to laugh, it causes them to relax. And if they relax, they don't have associations with your classroom and the history that you're trying to teach them that are negative in any way. But I think it really dawned on them about 2 years ago when a student said to me in class, "You really care about us, don't you?" And that phrase was startling to me, that question was startling to me because it implied some other people might not. I like to use a lot of primary sources because I think my students really enjoy when they see real voices of people in the past arguing passionately about the issues that they care about. And it's not quite as sanitized as a secondary digestion of what someone else has read and studied. All of those things together, I think, make my classroom lively, and it makes students feel welcomed and appreciated, and a place where they can be intellectually curious and challenged. For history majors who are thinking about teaching, I think it's important for you to have experience with students, and it could be your peers, it could be in field placement programs, it could be just tutoring, where you practice the skill of learning how to explain. And for a lot of history majors, that is simply telling the story, telling the narrative. I constantly tell my students, when I'm telling you a story, it's only partially the truth. The real story, the larger context, all the micro stories are actually a lot more complicated. And then every once in a while you get a student who asks a question, well, is that really what happened? So I think if you're going to major in history with an eye towards teaching, having the gift of narrative, the gift of explanation is very helpful in the classroom. I was quite surprised, I was stunned. The principal walked into my classroom, first period AP US History, and I thought to myself suddenly, am I getting an unannounced observation? Because he walked in alone, and then the rest of the committee walked in, and it dawned on me what was happening, and I was just speechless for a moment. It was extremely touching. They read the letters that students had written on my behalf, and those were extremely kind comments about what I had meant to those students and why they decided to write for me. It's wonderful to do what I do and then to realize in that moment that other people appreciate what you've done and that they feel touched by what you've done. Some of the dispositions that you need to be a teacher, particularly in history, those dispositions revolve around trying to find the best in students and then developing whatever they bring to the table. You have to, as a teacher in every subject, but especially so in history, to find a way to make an 18th century experience somehow relevant to someone in the 21st century who may not have enough background to really get at what you're trying to explain to them. I think if you can transfer the knowledge of the writing that you do in history classes to the idea of preparing and planning for teaching, then that will be helpful for you as a history major who plans on being a teacher as well. Having a good-natured disposition, being relaxed helps. Try not to take anything personally. I think if you can walk into a classroom with the ability to figure out what makes people tick, once again, you learn that from being a history major, that will help you in forming relationships with students. Students generally are not interested in what you have to teach until they know that you are interested in them as people. And honestly, I think you can get a lot of those skills studying history. I have the opportunity to try to bring out the best in my students. And that's not to say that, it's all fun and giggles and rainbows and smiles, because teaching is stressful. It's a human endeavor to go into a room with people who are hungry sometimes, people who are angry, some haven't slept, they didn't do their homework, they didn't do the reading, they've been sick, all kinds of issues. But you are looking for an avenue whereby you can get into a student's head for just 50 minutes and try to find something there that excites them, that energizes them, that causes them to think. And looking for that best self, the best of who they are, is what brings me a lot of joy in teaching. I really get a great deal of satisfaction at watching faces light up, at eyes light up, seeing students suddenly get something and then they ask a question, and then you watch understanding dawn on them as they're putting two and two together, or as they make connections because they realize that something they learned in world history the previous year has a relationship to something in U.S. history. And for that moment, you see just the energy in them as they're putting those two things together. There are probably students whose experiences I won't even know. They haven't told me. And maybe some years down the road they'll realize something that I did or something that I said or something that happened in my room made a difference for them. And I hope that's the case for all of them. I really do.